ADP chairman opens up on governance rift as Coco Gauff, Jannik and IGA Swiatek lead player demands for slam reform. ADP chairman Andrea Gaudenzi addressed one of tennis' most pressing flashpoints during the 2025 ADP finals, speaking candidly about the mounting tension between the sport's unified tour structure and the independent authority of the 4 Grand Slam tournaments. Gaudenzi acknowledged that the standstill between players and the slams has exposed fundamental flaws in the way the sport is governed, pointing to a structural imbalance that allows the sport's most lucrative events to operate without meaningful player representation. ADP chairman Andrea Gaudenzi highlights the structural imbalance driving the ongoing conflict. The issue has been brewing for most of 2024 and 2025. Top ADP and WTA stars, including Coco Gauff, Jannik and IGA Swiatek, came together earlier this year to demand major reforms from the Grand Slam tournaments. They argued that, despite tennis booming revenues, players remain underrepresented in decision-making and underpaid relative to the revenue generated by the most significant events. According to reports, the slams rejected detailed proposals submitted by the world's top 10 male and female players, which included calls for a larger share of revenue, improved welfare programs and financial transparency. Their request for a meeting during the US Open was also declined, with slam officials reportedly citing an ongoing legal conflict involving the Professional Tennis Players Association and larger negotiations over the global calendar. Gaudenzi's comments during the ongoing ATP finals placed a sharper spotlight on why these negotiations have been so difficult. He argued that the Grand Slam's independence is both a strength and a weakness for the sport, especially when compared to the ADP's governance model. There are obviously flaws in our system because of the legacy in having 4 slams independent, the ADP and the WTA and the ITF, he said. The slams, and I want to make this very, very clear, they are the best tournaments in our sport. They are incredible assets. The slams are probably the best way to showcase our sport. However, he also emphasized the disparity in representation. If you look from a player perspective, players have no representation, he explained. In the ADP, 50% of the governance is players. Every decision we make, we need the approval of the player board representative that gets elected by the Players' Council, which is 10 players representing the wider group. Gaudenzi noted that this creates a very democratic environment, where all key decisions require input from both player and tournament councils. By contrast, he said the 4 majors operate without needing to consult players. Obviously, you have 4 independent entities. Maybe that's to a certain extent an advantage because you just do things and you don't have to ask everyone permission. Why are players challenging the Grand Slam's prize money distribution models? Concrete financial disagreements have heightened the tension. Players have pointed to figures showing that Grand Slams distribute between 12% and 15% of their revenue as prize money, far below the roughly 22% given at major combined events like Indian Wells and the Italian Open. Wimbledon, for example, generated more than $555 million in 2024 but allocated only about 12.3% of the total to prize money. More. IGA Swiatek confused as she and Aryna Sabalenka stand with Jannik and Coco Gauff amid Grand Slam talks hiccup. Even with a significant bump in 2025, and a growing prize pool that reached $72.59 million, most of that increase favored semi-finalists and champions, leaving early-round competitors with only modest gains. Meanwhile, talks at Roland Garros, Wimbledon and later the US Open all stalled, largely because slam executives refused to share financial details or commit to major structural changes. The WTA Players' Council proposed redistributing more winnings toward earlier rounds, but both Wimbledon and the US Open rejected the idea despite record-setting prize pools. The PTPA lawsuit, led by Novak Djokovic's organization but not directly tied to the group of players behind the recent letters, has further complicated the landscape by accusing the tours and ITF of manipulating prize money and rankings to stifle competition. He stood at the edge of the court not as an umpire or a coach but as a man who'd spent a lifetime stitching structures together, the ADP chairman, weathered by committees, footnotes and late-night strategy calls. Today, though, the net felt different. It hummed with a new current, the players' voices amplified, insistent. Coco Gauff, Jannik and IGA Swiatek weren't merely names on the entry sheet this time. They were the movement calling for slam reform with a focus and moral clarity that had the tennis world leaning in. The chairman opened up like a player who had finally let the crowd see the inside of the locker room, honest, a little bruised but unashamed. He spoke of governance as if it were a delicate doubles partnership, power and responsibility passing back and forth, sometimes stepping on each other's toes. The rift he described wasn't a single crack but a network of fault lines, prize distribution, scheduling, player welfare, and the opaque corners of decision-making that had long been defended as tradition. In his telling, the demands weren't rebellion. They were, in the poetic irony of sport, an appeal to fairness. Coco, with her unflinching candor and electric serve, had become the human megaphone for young players who'd spent years on tour seeing the margins of the game grow wider while their dreams stayed the same size. Jannik, cerebral and quietly relentless, had framed the arguments in a language the board couldn't ignore. Data, economics, and a vision for sustainability that wouldn't cannibalize the sport's future. IGA, fierce, eloquent, and precise, threaded the moral needle, insisting that Grand Slams must be stages not just for glory but for humane conditions. Practice schedules that don't punish recovery, hospitality that treats every competitor with dignity, and courtside protocols that respect mental health. The chairman admitted that governance had often been defended with nostalgia, as if the past were a blueprint rather than a set of compromises made under different lights. "We built the house," he said, "and now the people who live in it, our players, are asking for renovations." He spoke of hearing Gauff's words not as noise but as a map. He described Sinner's spreadsheets landing on his desk like precise challenges and Swiatek's steady insistence on ethical clarity cutting through the white noise of politics. There was an elegance to the rift. It revealed how the sports institutions had grown without always consulting those who sustain its heartbeat. Tournaments had become empires of spectacle, yet the people who traveled them, the players, sometimes felt like tenants negotiating rents set by architects of a different era. The chairman's confession was that he'd underestimated the velocity of change. Where once policy moved with glacial deliberation, now social media, collective bargaining whispers, and players' unions threaded real-time accountability into every headline. He didn't promise revolution overnight. Instead, he offered something more radical in its modesty: listening that leads to action. The plan he unveiled smelled of compromise but also of courage. A review panel co-chaired by players,